So, I thought I'd talk to you today about revolution because I am busy working on a revolution for my second series set in the world of Sangwheel. The first series is complete, you can get it on my website and all those good things. But the second series is giving me some trouble, mostly because I didn't world build the revolution well enough before I wrote the first draft. Because I was like, well, the first draft of the book doesn't really deal with the revolution as such. It's got other things that it's bringing into play before the actual revolution enters center stage. But what I have found subsequently, having finished the first draft, is that I actually need the revolution. I need to understand what is going on with it so that I can start having the philosophical disagreements that are necessary for the revolution to happen. And that is the primary focus of what I want to just talk to you about today in this bite-sized episode of world building. The importance of your philosophy behind your revolution. So let me sketch the setup for you of what is going on here. See, the Empire of Imoven, which is an expansionistic empire, has control over their mages by means of a device called a quasul, which is inserted through the mage's wrists, through either wrists, and then they can't cast unless a key, which is normally controlled by a tier-born priest, because the tier-born priests are the sect that control the mages. So unless the tier-born activates the mage's quasul and allows them to cast, they can't cast magic, right? Well, they can, but it's incredibly painful. It is overcomable, but it is difficult. Now, the thing is, this revolution is based on the freedom of mages. And it's an interesting one because Imoven has already gotten rid of slavery, right? So they had an abolition movement. They had the abolition of slavery, but they retain, in essence, this slavery of mages. And the continent across from them, the continent of Kisangi, still has slavery, but that continent is slowly but surely going through the process of getting rid of slavery. They're going through an abolition movement, a very slow moving abolition movement. And in part, that is because of the philosophy coming over from our continent of Imoven, where the Imoven Empire is, the continent of Nokasa. And because these two continents sit kind of like this, they sit one above the other, right? This is Kisangi and this is Nokasa. Nokasa kind of spreads that way. So the philosophy of abolition originated here in Nokasa, and it's now spreading into Kisangi. But in Imoven, in the empire, it has now reached the point where there are people who are like, actually, we're enslaving mages. And yes, we understand you have to control mages. Mages can be a potential threat. They hold enormous personal power. All of those things are true. But we are still enslaving them. You know, we cannot, because of a risk aversion on our side, keep these people in chains. So this has led to an underground movement of, smuggling mages out and kind of giving mages freedom. And there's a growing revolution here. And I need to bring that much more clearly into this book, the philosophies behind it. And that got me going down, how did abolition start in our world? What was the abolition movement? Why did it occur? And it occurred because of the changing norms and mores that were driven in part by the changing thoughts as documented by the Enlightenment thinkers. Now, it's a chicken and egg situation, right? The norms change and people pen philosophies and the philosophies permeate the culture and the norms change. So it's a continuously ongoing process. And I needed to bring that into my world. So that's what I spent a large chunk of the past kind of 2 weeks doing, is thinking about like how these philosophies happened. And I actually went back to the slave abolition movement in Imogen and put in place all of those philosophies as well, and how that happened, and kind of built out the peoples of the empire a little more in order to understand it. Now, I'm going to take you through that process and why I put certain events where, but I'm also at the same time going to show you a great little world building tool that was introduced to me by somebody who just sent me a link and said, if you like the tool, won't you please make a video about it? So I like the tool and I'm making a video about it. So this is the tool. It is called Mythos Forge, and I'll take you through some of the kind of higher level parts of it in a little bit, and all the things you can do with it, at least the things that I've found on my initial exploration. And what I really, really like about it is that there is no AI that I can see in this. There's a human who developed this, who sent me a mail, and there are no like, do you want to generate events here? Do you want to create a world? Do you want to do whatever? Which, if you've been watching me for a while, I've had a journey with AI. At first I was like, it's okay. It's not so bad. And then I've steadily become more and more anti-AI until I'm now at the point where I saw the Copilot's little badge in Notepad, and I actually just got so annoyed that I uninstalled Windows from my PC, and my whole PC setup now runs on Linux. So, here we are. I'm now a Linux user, because I no longer want AI. I don't want to see it. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear it. I'm done. I still use it to search with, because what else can you search with these days? Google have broken their own search engine so badly. But then I just follow the links to go read the actual documents. Anyway, so first I did have a calendar for Imogen. It's a moon month calendar. It's one of the few calendars in my world that is based on months, and they have 13 months, and then they've got a couple of extra days that are decided by the Tierborn sect, when those should happen, sort of a religious holidays, in order to synchronize for when the seasons start getting out of whack, right? Because there is some drift with the moon. There's like a day or two extra per year, and then once every couple of years the Tierborn will say, okay, we're now having this festival to synchronize the calendar again, much like the Romans did it, and various other cultures. Okay, so I loaded the calendar in here. It was remarkably easy to create this calendar. There's a little that you just like add your months here, and all my months are 28 days because it's a moon calendar. So very, very easy to use. You've got your days of the week set up as well. I don't have leap year rules in here because my rules aren't rules. They're decided by the Tierborn sect. That's kind of part of their power, is deciding when these things happen. I created a whole bunch of years. So this 221 is 123 years before the story kicks off, right? So this is a good century and a bit ago. There was a fellow called Harib Arif, uh, who pens his philosophical argument that the emperor with the test of Rossaroo is necessary because the people need a strong force to keep their base nature in check. Now, why did I start here? Why did I create this philosophy first? Because one of the big issues that you have to solve when you start saying that people are equal is, okay, but then why do we have kings? Why do we have birthright rulership, right? And there were various philosophers in our timeline and world that solved this problem. Like Thomas Hobbes said, we need the kings to keep our base nature in check. We trade safety for the power of kings, so that we trade our freedom for safety, basically, with the power of kings. And that was Thomas Hobbes's the kind of thrust of his argument. And that is what I based Habi on, Arif on, his philosophy on, is that kind of Hobbesian argument. And the Rasaru is a competition between all the potential heirs to the imperial throne, and they they kill each other. It's a empire, they kill each other in this contest, and only one is left standing. And so he argues that this proves that that person is strategically strong, they're powerful, and they can provide the safety the empire needs. Because it's not just a one-on-one fight, right? It's a chariot fight where you lead 100 other soldiers against 100 other soldiers in like a battle, and it's a whole months long process and shenanigans. Anyway, long story short, so Harif pens this, and this is the first of the philosophical arguments that I needed to have in order to start making that transition to people are actually equal, which is the argument you need to have in order to have slavery become a thing that you can abolish. Because without the principle of kind of equality, it's very hard to abolish slavery, because it's very hard to argue that people shouldn't be slaves. You see the problem, right? So you need that argument. You need that philosophical argument. Okay. I'm going to skip along to the next year where you have this little button here which you can show your events. We have no events in this year. Then we have 2 events in this year. The first is the Whisper sect is created. Okay, so the Whisper sect is a new sect of the threesome religion in Imoven. So every nation in my world is either essentially atheist or believes in the threesome gods, but they define the relationship between the gods in different ways. That is kind of the cultural shifts, right? So the nation at the top of Kisangi defines it as a sibling relationship, the goddess and her 2 brothers. Kisangi defines it as a threesome, and they are the dominant force in the religion, and they define it as a lover relationship. In Imoven, it's defined as a friendship relationship. The 3 gods are friends, they're not lovers, and that is what the Tearborn believes. Now, the Whisper sect is a new sect in Imoven that they're still on board with like the gods being friends. They're not heretics in that sense, but they believe that the friendship of the gods means that all men must be friends, and therefore all men are equal. And I base them somewhat, very roughly, very, very roughly, on kind of the Quaker movement, right? The equality, and because the Quakers argued for abolition. And so I wanted that religious element in the run up to abolition in the Imoven Empire. Okay, our second event is over here on Dream Day, and it is where we have Vidya, who pens her treatise on the rights of the emperor to rule based on his ability to keep the people safe. Should the emperor fail the people have a right to revolt. So I took this inspiration for this particular philosophy from 2 sources. One is the Chinese mandate of heaven. You have the mandate of heaven until you lose it, because you lose it. But also from Voltaire. So Voltaire actually did argue that the legitimacy of kings comes from the lack of revolution in their lands. And if they rule poorly, it is not just the right, but almost the duty of their citizens to rebel. So I created this philosopher, Vidya, who argues that kind of same philosophy, right? This is all still part of the make kings not divine, make the emperor not divine, not based on birthright, not purely bloodline based, right? I mean, it's still obviously it is a bloodline empire and all the rest of that, but that his legitimacy to rule doesn't come purely from he was born here. So Vidya also argues that, you know, the emperor is very educated because of his birth and he is prepared to rule and so on. And if he rules well, then all is well. And if he doesn't rule well, then people must rebel and overthrow. Then we skip on few more years and we come to Redaya, who pens a treatise against slavery, arguing that slavery weakens the rights of all people. Basically saying that if we say that these people are not human, these people are chattel. Oh, bear in mind, I'm arguing here about chattel slavery, not debt slavery yet. That comes way later, but chattel slavery here. And Redaya here argues that if you say that these people are chattel, you say that all people are chattel. Basically, Redaya's argument is either everyone is free or no one is free. It's a group project, not an individual one. And then we also, in that same year, have Sarijay penning an economic treatise proving that we can actually be economically better off without slavery, that in fact there are economic benefits to having workers instead of slaves to work in whatever capacity in agriculture and so on. This is a pre-industrial society, so I am taking things that happen in the industrial revolution of our world and kind of transporting them into a pre-industrial society, which does necessitate some shenanigans, because this philosophy is kind of based on Adam Smith's philosophy. He argued that slavery is not just a moral ill, he did argue that, but he also argued that economically it doesn't make sense. And that's very much an industrial revolution argument. But I think that you can make the argument even without the Industrial Revolution, because you can argue from the perspective of you have to feed a slave, you know, even when they're not working, like if they get sick and so on and so forth. So you can make the argument that if you have to treat people kind of in any way as human beings, you know, if you're not just working them to death, it actually is better to for them to be responsible for themselves. Next. Oh, hold on. I skipped on. There we go. All right. So here we actually kick off with the abolition movement against slavery, against chattel slavery in Imogen. So here is where, you know, you start getting nobles who argue against slavery, pulling on these philosophical treatises. You start getting people like making speeches. You start getting people actually freeing their slaves. You know, there's a whole movement around it. And I haven't detailed everything about the movement because I don't need it yet, but I needed those philosophies and I needed some of the dates. All right. Then it takes quite a few years, but the emperor does eventually in 238 ban slavery. Okay, so that's about a century before the main event kicks off. Okay, now at this point, majors are still enslaved, but there isn't chattel slavery in the empire anymore. There's still debt slavery because it's hard to get rid of that stuff, but there isn't chattel slavery, and you can still be sentenced to a slave as a criminal punishment, because again, like, it is a process to get rid of slavery. It's not like a, you know, we go between full slavery and no slavery. Then for the mages, because now remember, I'm building up to a revolution based on mage freedom. What I needed to do was I needed to find a reason why the mage thing becomes important to people. And so I had a new treatise penned in 252, right? Where there is a philosopher who's arguing that actually mages are human. Okay? We can't say they're not human. We have to treat them as human, and as such, they're covered by the same rights as we imbue to everybody to say that you can't be a slave because of it. So we need to not have mages being treated as slaves. Then we get to what is essentially the trigger point of the mage revolution, which is the empire expands into the tribal jungles of Imoven, which is kind of jungles off to the on the western side of the continent. And the thing about the tribes are they have mages as shamans, right? So their magical discipline translates as shamanic. And those shamans are seen as their wise ones, their guides, not their chiefs, not their leaders. It's not a dominance hierarchy, but as like a guide, right? So when the empire expands into the tribal jungles and they start enslaving the mages, the tribal people speak out against this. This is horrifying to them, and it results in a very hard conquest. They don't work well with the empire, and the empire is not generally a smash the opposition. They kind of tend to want to make deals, and they struggle to come to any kind of arrangement because of the shamanic um, tradition of the tribal people. And then you start having the shamans and the children with talent being incorporated into like this mage discipline with the quassels and the tierborn, and the whole thing starts becoming a very uncomfortable feeling that also gives a great deal of fuel to the philosophers who are arguing that we should not be doing this to mages, that it is not right to do this to mages. And indeed, the tribal chiefs send a speaker to the capital to denounce the use of the quassels and everything around it, and to to say that this what you are doing is wrong, and it is against our principles and our beliefs, and why are you doing this to us? We have agreed to be a part of your empire. And then the Whisper sect, which is still around, still doing their thing, decree a day of mourning for mages held in captivity, and this becomes a festival that they celebrate. And then there's a group of mages, so this is an early rebellion. Just move that. There's a group of mages that actually attempt to create a free zone where mages can live, right? So they actually break away from the empire. They create a tier-born free zone where they say, you can come to us for magic, but we are going to be independent of the empire. And they create that in the Taran Highlands, which is important to me because the main character who's going to be involved in all this is we originally meet her when she is in the Taran Highlands, and she's married to a Taran Highland lord, right? So having had the Mage Rebellion there allows her to have some knowledge of all of these events and to share that knowledge with the reader sort of through her interaction and her history and so on. Okay, so we've got this mage, this free area. Oh, and this is going to be a failed revolution, but it's very important to have such failures on the path to your eventual successful revolution, right? Some revolutions have to fail so that others can run. That's kind of just the way it goes. All right. Inspired by kind of the mages, unfortunately, the Highland clans actually revolt. They try to throw off the yoke of the empire, and this results in the empire obviously smashing the Highlands, and the Tierborn end up massacring the free mages, and it's a bloodbath of a year, right? And that is the end of that particular revolution. Then there is in 272, there is a revolt among the tribal people, which, because of their whole shaman situation not getting better and their children being taken into the Tierborn and all the rest of that. So they actually do revolt. It is put down again bloodily, but some revolutions have to fail so that others can succeed. And then we have a single incident where a whisperer priest is actually martyred. And while he's protecting mages who are busy escaping the empire, because now we start having an actual tunnel of like getting people out of the empire and getting the mages away and smuggling them elsewhere and all of those kinds of activities. So we start having like actual escapees going out. And that is where a whisperer priest gets martyred. And that leads us into more or less um, the main part of the story where current people start being born and start arguing for mage freedom and so on. And that'll lead into the kickoff of the actual book and Waini. Okay, so what do you think of the fake philosophy history? Do you see why I made it? Do you see how important it is to have that philosophical growth and the failed revolutions on the path to kicking off your actual successful revolution? How much you kind of need that build up of changing mores and norms that result in people saying, actually, we can no longer act like this. We now have to act like that, and that conflict reshaping their society. And while I've got you, let me just show you some of the um, cute things here. So you've got a Loom of Fate, which is a plot board. I'm just going to open this one. You've got like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and you can put some nice scenes together there. And you can also then in your Tomb of Worlds, no, not in your Tomb of Worlds, in your Chronicler's Forge, you can then actually forge your manuscript. So, which I did over here. And then you have your scene along with the the beats that you put into your scene in the plotting side. You have it available here in the writing, and you can export this as a docx or whatever you'd like to do. And then um, the other thing that is cool about this little program is you have a family board. So I actually did more work on the La Roche line. So let me show you quickly. So you've got like your founders and then you can have like relationships like between children and cousins and whatever. So it's a nice little like blood and vows, and there's also a faction web where you can set up um, factions between people. So here I've got like families, and I've got guilds and the threesome order and so on, and they all have their ways in which they relate to other people. What else did I read? Oh, the Tomb of Worlds is quite nice as well. It's a kind of like a wiki idea. I actually created this for our revolution, which is that they would create a a language that is based on weaving, not work, right? In order to make the path that the slaves follow safe, to mark certain safe houses, and to to say that there's an enemy here or there's a friend here and so on. So because I thought that would be, I based it kind of on the World War II, where the women used knitting in order to pass spy messages on to the resistance in various countries. And the Nazis obviously looked right past it because, women knitting, I mean, it's just a feminine activity. Who cares, right? So I used that same principle in creating this kind of language. So there's a very interesting language here where you can actually design your own ruins and do all kinds of fun things if you're into conlangs. And then you can have locations and technologies and culture. So I put my like Kwasuls over here, um, what they do, what they look like, and so on. So these are all the kind of things you have in Mythos Forge. I will leave a link to it down below, and I hope that you will check it out. As I say, I thought it was a great little tool. I really appreciate that I was sent a link to it, and I've been using it a little bit to, like, especially with the calendar. I really do like putting my events into that calendar so that I have this like stream that I can go through and be like, okay, wait, I need something more here, I need something more there, and so on. And I also like the plotting, like the board with the act structure, to put your scenes in and say, okay, I need more here, I need more here, etc., etc. So yeah, check that out, and I will see you soon for another bite-sized episode.